in the purest soul, it takes minimum 3 years for integration of complete and utter awakening and rise of Kundalini. And normally it takes up to 12 years. You see, this is why in Indian culture, in Indian subcontinent, sadhana is measured in 12 years, because it is squarely related here to this understanding. Kundalini experience and its phases from Arman. Background. I have some technical questions related to the event that started my roller coaster ride 5 years ago, which coincides with the completing the Kundalini course. I hope you remember me describing this in a previous Q&A. One thing I didn't mention before is that prior to the main event, in inverted commas, I felt a click in my lower back, followed by a light, airy energy like a snake that swirled in my belly and wound its way up the back of my head. It felt amazing, and I felt very light afterwards, unaware of what was to come. The other relevant part is the rush of energy that first burst below my navel, then moved through my heart, throat, and pierced my eyeballs painfully, followed by a loud pop, a bright light, and a rush of love and bliss filling every cell of my body. Now that I have completed the Kundalini course, I have a better understanding of most of it, but I'm still cautious and want clarity on a couple of points. There are 4 questions in relation to that. And the questions are quite long, so I think what I would do, I would respond to each question on a spot rather than reading them all. Okay? So maybe this is the approach for this one. Can you talk about the first part that I described? The soft, winding energy that swirled around the belly and up my spine that seemed to kickstart everything. I don't remember this being referenced in the course. Apologies if it was covered and I missed it. Well, we did speak in the course about the belly, that is the Manipura, being the place where the convergence of all 10 principal nadis spring forth. All 10 principal nadis go from there. And it is from there that very often the experience of true rising of Kundalini is being a tangible, let's say, display of how that energy is felt, other than, let's say, experiencing it in a more of a sequence unfolding from the base chakra of Muladhara. So we dealt with that. So it's not surprising that what you have described here, that experience of that swirled energy like a snake in your belly and wound its way up the back of your head. So we did reference that in the course. We spoke about it, the importance of the chakra associated with the literally conglomerate of all the pathways, its immediate proximity to the bulb of Kanda, and effectively speaking, what we refer in our live programs when I direct your attention to the diaphragmatic movement as a formal way of entering our meditations often, as a seat of a lower vital. This is literally where vitality is situated, like not dissimilar to, let's say, how it is spoken in other traditions of Taoism or Zen. So that hara point, right? The second question here, as far as the painful parts, where it went through the navel, heart, and throat, where the granties or psychic knots that you spoke of in the course, is this typically how it happens? Well, it typically, and you mentioned painful parts, is when there is a lot of psychic information. So in other words, it can be experienced literally as a pop, snap, like it could be experienced as even with the sound. Like for instance, in your background, you described here when it moved through your heart, throat, and pierced your eyeballs painfully. There are optical chakras corresponding to both eyes. So when the optical chakra is pierced, it is often experienced by that sensation of popping, literally behind the eyes. I don't know. I've heard it being as painful, but also as neutral experience in some cases. I've heard it's being experienced as a pleasant experience. I, for example, experienced as it being only blissful and not painful. But whenever there are granties, these knots are pierced, and that's why that term, piercing, then it could be accompanied by painful experiences, because it is perhaps the psychological content of that particular, let's say, chakra is being released immediately at a somatic level, you see? So that otherwise pain cannot be experienced unless it is becomes somatic. But since our knowledge of the koshas, we understand that everything is fused through prana. Literally, our tissues of the body are fused with the manomaya and vijnanamaya, and not to forget the anandamaya, through the pranic layer, through the pranic sheath. So it is the manomaya kosha which contains all the psychic impressions, emotional impressions, feelings. So when the content is large there, it can immediately experience itself on a somatic level. But there's nothing to worry about that, because this is also clinically known and classically known to be part and parcel of the process. This takes us to the third question. When I described the light after the pop in my head, I mentioned how it frightened me back into my body, causing me to open my eyes in shock. I immediately felt sad, as I thought I had missed most magnificent experience, even though I wasn't consciously afraid. The love and bliss that followed eased this regret, but I often wonder if I could have stayed with the light longer, and what that would have been like. Was my experience normal, or was something cut short? I suspect something was pierced, perhaps the bromadia. As this piercing sensation and the subsequent flow of love align with your descriptions, I'd appreciate your insight. So, first, I don't want us to entertain would be, should be, how it would have been, okay? So we adopt here the attitude and understanding that what happened and how it happened, the manner with which it happened, including that what may feel as less or lesser in any degree, even if it feels as short of, even if it may feel as accompanied by some less spectacular events, we accept this as and for what it is, because when it comes to the nature of this, what we speak, what you write, what you relate, what we can give to the language now, there is no such thing as what could have happened. It could have happened only the way it happened, you see? It's like almost analyzing what would have happened if different chromosomes were accepted by the ovum, and then instead of me being born, my potential brother would be born, or maybe a sister, or maybe like what would have happened if my mother conceived me with another man? You know what I mean? Like, what if my father was like, there's no such thing, even when it comes to this physical level. So can you imagine when it comes to this profound, very subtle level? So this is what already you have shared here, that love, that bliss that followed, you see, soothed in a way, eased that regret. And that's what's important here. No regret should be. It will be a speculation to say what would have happened if you remained there longer. Believe me, there are a lot of experiences like this, extremely, extraordinary subtle. When it comes to that level, then the bravest of us may have been shaken and have been shaken. So it could be a speculation to also suggest that remaining in that state with your physiology not being fully prepped for it could also have been not desired in terms of the outcome. We know that's why I'm saying what happened meant to happen in that way, at that level, you see? So build on what you have. Let's not look back in disappointment, let alone regret. Accept this as a grace in the making, grace at work. Okay, there's a lot to celebrate in your case, in your story. And the fourth question, I sometimes feel unclear about the timing of the process you mentioned, particularly the 12 years often cited by sages. What stage does this refer to? Is it about integration after the journey to the grantees and the head process is complete, or do these phases fall within that within that timeline? Could you elaborate? Well, 12 years is simply linked to the cosmic cycle here of the body, down to complete and utter replacement on a cellular level. There are phases, as we know, there are phases when there is a renewal of the cells. New cells born, others are wither away. I don't now at this very moment remember exactly, but there are monthly phases, there are yearly phases. So these phases are, let's say, every 3 years, I think all our cells, every 4 years, are completely replaced. But 12-year here phase is in relation to the subtle body, you see? It's in relation to how much the full and complete integration and fusion of all this, what is spoken of as the sheaths, the koshas. So everything then becomes seamless. 12 years are classical span. Ramana Maharshi in his responses retorted that even in the most prepared, in the most, let's say, for integration of complete and utter awakening and rise of Kundalini, normally it takes up to 12 years. You see, this is why in Indian culture, in Indian subcontinent, sadhana is measured in 12 years, because it is squarely related here to this understanding. So in other words, it's an incorporation and integration of all the aspects of one's psyche, not just integration at the level of, let's say, how physiology, because physiology is constantly will be subjected to the prakriti, the subject to the constitution, and one would have to, of course, do this graceful walk, that balancing act, because no one is exempt. In fact, people, when they think that if they are awakened and if they have this very strong, like let's say, a phase, particularly when we're younger, and if it is accompanied by a lot of spontaneous pranayamas, one becomes very strong, very, very resilient, very and it doesn't mean that one is exempt from taking really good care of one's state of neurophysiology. It could be the opposite. One's neurophysiology can be assaulted. And one, instead of becoming stronger, becomes more susceptible to everything. And that also is very well known. This is very well known, that kind of awakened, one knows one's essence. But when it comes down to the physiology, one constantly has to insulate, propagate, prop up constantly. Watch what one's eating, one's lifestyle. Vata constitution here is, above all else, is the most affected. Rules nervous system, and most changeable, of course, so most susceptible to changes and most susceptible to imbalances. So at the same time, very adaptable, right, in every way. So what do we make out of that? So this 12-year phase is in relation to that, what goes in terms of that understanding of what the 12-year cycle here represents. You see? It's complete and utter remake. And within that phase of the remake, one comes out, one could say, if one completed that phase, one would not even know to the degree one's psyche has changed, simply because reference to everything that one used to be is utterly and entirely remade. So in other words, you will see your own photos, pictures. You will try to remember how you were, and of course in a casual conversation, you'll be fine, you'll be said, oh yeah, I used to be this, I used to be that. But in truth, in reality, if push comes to shove, you know that you're an entirely different being. Nothing left of that. Nothing. And that's what we spoke and touched upon in the previous response, because that is the true Kundalini process.